I was not in a leadership position. I was the junior military assistant. The senior military assistant was the same job Colin Powell had when he was a 2-star. You know, it was a pretty important job. And my job was to push paper. And every day a 4-foot stack of paper would come through SecDef's office. And I got to work at 5:30 every morning. And they gave me a box of yellow highlighters. And I'd sit there with a highlighter and highlight what I thought was important from this 4-foot stack of paper. And my goal was to get it down to 8 or 9 inches of stuff and put it in the general's in basket. And then he would decide whether it was truly important enough for the Secretary of Defense to see. Well, the general never had time to train me. It was a stress-filled office. They just threw me into the job and said, here, do it. And from my desk, I could watch the general work every day. And at the beginning, I noticed he was throwing 90% of what I thought was important in the trash can without ever giving me any feedback. And I was demotivated. I hated this job. I actually thought about resigning from the military because I was so unhappy. And one day I decided, you know what? The general doesn't have time to coach or train me. I'm going to train myself. I'm going to coach myself. And so what the general never knew was when he went home from work at 8:30 at night, I would go into his office and take his trash can, dump it out on his desk, and I would compare everything of mine that he threw away to what he sent on to the Secretary of Defense. And what I tried to do was to figure out what was important to my boss and try to read his mind so that I could be more effective for him and lift burdens off his shoulders. And pretty soon, 90% of what I was sending in, the general was just rubber stamping it and sending it on to the secretary. And by me becoming more effective, the general never realized I was lifting burdens off his shoulders so that he had more time in his day to do what he thought was important. Near the end of his tour, his son came down with a very rare illness and almost died. And the general was off work for 45 days. And normally when the senior military assistant is off work, they bring in a visiting 2- or 3-star admiral or general to fill his shoes. William Perry said, let Mike do it. For 45 days, I did the same job that Colin Powell did when he was a 2-star. Now, I didn't do it at the same level, but in 45 days, I never let one ball drop. The general's son recovers, he comes back to work. He goes in to see the secretary for a private conversation. And what they never knew was when they were having a private conversation, I would always stand in the doorway listening to their private conversation. I called it intelligence gathering. The general goes in and says, Dr. Perry, how did Mike do in my absence? Without thinking, William Perry looked up and said, Paul, Mike did great. I consider you and him interchangeable now. And his shoulders went like this, a 2-star West Point graduate being compared to a low-life Navy commander. But my chest went out, and it was like, I can do 2-star level work. And what William Perry unwittingly gave me that day was validation. And from that validation, it gave me the confidence to go become a better captain. My last day in his office is when he called me in to give me that piece of advice about if I'm disappointed in an outcome, not to blame others first, but to look inward and ask myself what I could have done differently to have generated a better outcome. And he's the one who taught me to always challenge the process. And it's something that I continue to do to this day.